Hi Internet, I'm Dave, and welcome to Chapter 1 of Macabre Comics. To clarify, the first video was the prologue, and now you're on Chapter 1, so if you didn't watch the first video, go back and check that out. So just to catch you up to speed, if it's been a while since you've watched the last video, remember this is an audiobook first and foremost. If you're watching this, you might be a little bit bored. This is mostly for listening. And don't forget, the chapters jump back and forth. They go from different point of views. The prologue was about Ellie Green. That was a one-shot issue called Heads or Tails. Now we're jumping into a completely new character. Now, in the last video, I clarified that this was not for younger viewers. This has some mature content in it. I stand by that in this chapter very much so, okay? The last one was kind of adult-themed. There was some violence and some blood and some mature themes. This one's pretty adult-themed, okay? So, once again, viewer discretion is advised. Don't say I didn't warn you, because I did. So, without further ado, might as well start Chapter 1. Chapter 1, Blackbird's Song, Issue 1. All she could do was yell out in pain as the fangs sunk into her leg. The dog drew blood, and Blackbird called out into the night. Her voice pierced through the air and ascended to the moon. Gah! She wailed, unable to fend him off. Her hands were bound to the brick wall behind her. The chains were bolted in, and many a gimp in the past had tried to wrench himself free. The sex dungeon was lit with a few lamps that looked like torches. She gritted her teeth as blood ran down her leg and stained the Arabian rug beneath her. She knew it was authentic. Mr. Heft had bragged about it before he whistled. Then Roscoe had leapt forward, barking like a mad dog. "Enough, killer!" Mr. Heft yelled. His oh-so-clever little nickname. How this guy ran any organized crime operation was beyond her reasoning. But the dog didn't listen. "I said that's enough!" The black ivory cane came down and cracked the muscle-bound mud over the head. The creature whimpered and released his jaws immediately. He almost fell to the ground, had Mr. Heft not yanked the chain back first. Blackbird gasped deeply as sweat ran down her neck and breasts. Air slowly creeped its way into the now open wound. Damn. Another pair of leotards down the drain. The sting ran up to her thigh as she tried to push it out of her head. Blurred vision wasn't helping. Soon everything would go fuzzy from blood loss, and she already hadn't eaten in almost a day and a half. The sex dungeon was one of Heft's side businesses. Funny. A pimp who employs dominant women. Blackbird almost laughed when she heard about it. Then she had almost cried. What kind of doms would let a polished, bald waste of balls like this put his boot heel over them? "Had enough, princess?" he asked with a snide grin. The smell of cigars was constantly on his breath. He looked like a redwood tree had birthed him. Tall, solid as a rock, and with a muscled jawline to match. In comparison, Blackbird wasn't much to look at. He could lift her 107-pound frame with one hand. "Why?" she asked through desperate breath. "That all you got?" His sharp laughter cut through the room. "You hear that, boys? The girl's still got a sense of humor." Heft's cronies sniggered against the back wall. 3 little urchins who wouldn't have a half-filled sack between them. Another example of how to live under someone's boot heel. "If you insist." "Roscoe, again!" The poor dog tried to get up, but the big idiot had almost cracked his skull in half. He barely put a foot forward before falling to the side. "You pathetic mutt! I said attack! Get up!" The cane came down again, this time on the dog's ribs. Roscoe whimpered a second time. Blackbird tried to feel sorry for the creature. He had just turned her leg into a chew toy, but it wasn't his fault. When a dog is vicious, it's the owner that really needs to be put down. "I said get up!" He wound his hand back for another blow. "Hey!" Hef stopped and looked at the 18-year-old sitting before him. with her dyed black hair, bleeding leg, and the rubber mask she kept held on with spirit gum. "Hit the mud again, and I'll blow your fucking head off." The silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Blackbird swore she heard the jaws of the idiot trio tighten along the back wall. They were standing between a rack of kinky toys and a bench meant for people to lean over and take it up the ass. The fucking machine with the 9-inch rubber cock on it was in plain view. For a split second, Mr. Heft's eyes flashed with a rage that could equal a volcano. Then his laughter reached new limits. "You really are full of jokes, aren't you, girlie?" he managed to say between chortling. "You trespass into my house, knock out some of my girls, and expect to beat some kind of confession out of me? And now I've got you right where I want you, and you're still cracking wise. This is priceless." He was going red in the face. "What are you going to do? We've got your guns, girlie. Hector over there is keeping them warm in case I tell him to plug you. You know, for when I get bored." He stretched the last word out, letting her know that he could change his mind at any time. She eyed Hector, the one with the paperboy hat from the 1920s. She'd have to remember that. It was true. She had come over at around midnight, using the back door and expecting to slip into Heft's office undetected. One girl had been with a client. He was dressed in a full rubber suit and lay cuffed to a bed. The dominatrix was standing beside him, smacking his balls with a stinging strap and asking how he felt to be her pathetic bitch. He had seen Blackbird, but the dom hadn't. Blackbird had enough time to sneak up behind the pro-dom and put a chloroform rag over her mouth and nose. She had felt bad. This woman wasn't her real target. The bitch boy tried to cry out, but the ball gag was keeping that job clear. Thank you, BDSM. Blackbird left him where he was. If anyone heard a gimp screaming, they still wouldn't come running. But just for fun, she attached some electric nodes to his already red ball sack and turned up the voltage. Let the masochist enjoy that for a while. She had smiled when she did it too. A sadist needed to get her kicks, after all. None of it had mattered. Heft had put a round through the guy's head when they had dragged her into the room and chained her up. Apparently, he hated hearing the noise. That was 2 days ago. His body was still there. Mr. Heft thought it would be funny to let the corpse decay with Blackbird in the same room. The blood had already dripped out of him long ago and formed a nice drying ring on the hardwood floor beneath the bed. His final moments had been excruciating pain. Maybe that bullet was a relief. The dom had woken up a few hours later. Mr. Heft had let her come and see the petite purple-wearing princess and kick her a few times in the face with her stiletto heels. Her jaw still felt swollen. Blackbird had decided to check the place out a week ago. It had been the next stop on her hit list. Heft may run a legitimate dungeon, but that wasn't the only jar with his fingers in it. And yes, despite the illicit activity, the little black box was legitimate. No sex. It wasn't a brothel, just a place for weaker men to come and get punished every now and then. Blackbird had felt right at home when she had first heard of it. In another lifetime, she may have considered working for the place. But not for Heft. The guy was into too much. Last she heard, the list went on for miles. Heroin dealing, weapons smuggling, child slavery. No, seriously. A sweatshop had been raided in the outskirts last year. The building was owned by a subsidiary of Heft's business, so naturally someone else took the fall for the illegal operation. I am truly shamed today to learn that our dear Peter, a man I once called friend, could have been behind something like this, Heft had said during a press conference after the dust had settled. To think that little innocent boys and girls were being forced to make his products. She had to give it to his acting skills as she had watched the tape. He even managed to shed a tear. But the public image was gone. Now she saw the real rage in his eye. That volcano. The same grit and ferocity that only his dogs got to see. He thrust his cane forward and the butt end of it slammed into Blackbird's throat. He shoved down hard and she gritted her neck muscles. The alternative was choking to death. "Tell me, princess," he almost asked, but it was definitely a statement. "What's a little pixie like you going to do to me? No one knows you're here, do they? I'll bet you have no one to go home to. Who would miss you if I took you out right now?" Blackbird couldn't answer. Her only response was grunting in pain. Hef leaned closer to her face as he pressed down on his cane. "Just a few more feet?" "You took out 2 of my guys, I'll give you that. But you really think you can touch me? I help run this city. You know how much money comes out of my pockets in this burg?" He tilted in another foot. "The real heroes? They're gone. Now the people just have shitty masked punks like you and that veteran running around shooting up the place." He got close enough for the second phase of her plan to work. Thank God she knew how to think on her feet. With all the saliva she could muster, Blackbird spat on his face and caught him right in the left eye. He flinched back, his cane dropping to the ground. She sucked down air for the second time that night, quite literally like her life depended on it. "You little bitch!" he yelled out. His beefy palm wrapped around her hair and he slammed her head back into the brick wall. A single note rang through Blackbird's head. Her teeth cracked. She could taste blood in her mouth from biting her tongue. Hef leaned down until his nose was about 3 inches from hers. "Make your last words count. I'll bet they put a mouth like that to work in hell." She glared into his eyes. Her ferocity behind the mask was rising, and he could see it. He had won, hadn't he? She was locked away, literally in his dungeon. So why was she smiling? She stared that behemoth of a man right in the eye, leaned into him and whispered, "Bang." The pistol in her heel clicked back when she squeezed her toes. Poor Mr. Hef, so preoccupied with her pretty whittle face, didn't even notice that she had bent her leg and was resting the heel of her combat boot next to his ear. The custom-made shoe cracked back. A small puff of gunpowder flew out of the slots in the back of the heel. Mr. Hef's ear and a chunk of his neck went flying up to the ceiling. The monster howled out in pain and clasped his hand to his head, dropping down before her and crying out like the poor bitch boys he rented his girls out to. Hector and the 2 other cronies snapped up from the wall when they saw their employer fall from heaven. Blood began to drain over his light brown suit jacket. Blackbird spun quickly and kicked him off of her in one fluid motion. She ended the kick with her heel pointed to the chain around her wrist. She squeezed the toes of her other foot and a second shot cut through the air. The chain snapped off the wall and Blackbird felt her arms sag with freedom. Hector and the 2 boys reached for their own pieces. Only one was quick enough to get a shot off. Blackbird heard it impact about 6 inches above her head. She swept her leg around in front of her and fired 3 more shots. The first 2 hit home and the 2 nameless thugs dropped to the ground. The third got Hector square in the head. Well, one of them. He dropped to the ground, screaming in agony and gripping his broken cock like a child who had to use the little boy's room. "You fucking bitch!" he wailed out. Blackbird rose up. She kept her weight on her good leg, already feeling the limp coming on from where the dog had sunk its teeth. The chain was still attached to her left arm, but it slid free from the wall with ease. She flung her arm forward and cracked one of the solid links on Hector's head, knocking him backwards onto his ass. He tried to look back up, but she had already crossed the room to him. Her boot heel slammed into his throat and pinned him down. "Don't struggle," she warned. "There's still 4 more rounds in this heel. I could blast through your jugular and still sleep like a baby tonight." Tears ran down Hector's cheeks from the pain he was in. Blackbird, keeping her foot on Hector's neck, crouched down and took her guns from within his jacket. They were a matching pair of black handguns, police issue for New Zenith. They had been her dad's, back when they were silver, and when he wasn't dead. You shouldn't take a girl's toys, she cautioned, pointing the tips to his eyes. You need to be punished. She took her heel off his throat and brought it closer to his mouth. Stick that tongue out. I've been sitting there for 2 days straight and my shoes are filthy. I think they need a cleaning. Go to hell, you bit— Crack! The bullet flew from the gun in her right hand and whizzed through Hector's left thigh. He yelled out again, spasming from the new hole in his leg. Blackbird didn't care. Was that back talk? She asked. I don't think so. I told you to start licking. She slammed her heel into his chin. Clean my boot. She didn't need to yell. She knew how to make her will be done. Hector sniveled and shook beneath her. He stuck out his tongue and started to clean the solid black surface, even licking right around the hot barrel of the hidden pistol. That's a good boy, she told him. The moment was cut short when she heard screaming from across the room. Blackbird looked back and saw Mr. Heft rushing her, his cane raised over his shoulder. She managed to stagger back and roll with the blow to the head. It was still enough to send her falling to the ground again. She barely had time to meet the hardwood surface when Heft shot his leg out and flew her across the room with a kick to the ribs. His bloodlust had been released, and Blackbird was the only thing in his sights. Her pistols fell from her hands and she dropped perfectly into the leopard print sofa near the northern wall, knocking it over with her momentum. Heft ran at her like a wild cat let out of its cage. Blackbird aimed her boot through the sofa and pulled back on the specially engineered trigger. The bullets flew through the charging idiot's shin and he collapsed to the floor like a rag doll. She could hear him screaming, so Blackbird knew it was safe to take a few moments and catch her breath. She rose from behind the sofa and stared down at the bald man. He had seemed so imposing just 5 minutes ago, like he had been birthed from the side of a mountain face. Now he was just a pathetic pebble, a broken man, no more than that corpse in the rubber suit staining the sheets of a $2,000 bed. She stalked over to him and wrapped the chain around his neck, squeezing just as hard as he had only moments ago. Think, Heft. I know you're not a brilliant man, but just try and remember. 4 years ago, there was a shooting outside the Archfall Medical Center. 3 men, 2 victims, 1 gun. Did you have anything to do with it? She pulled down tighter on the chain. Don't lie to me. No, Heft barked. I know who you're talking about. Wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. Then who did? Blackbird delivered a solid shot to his balls with her shin, just to remind him how stupid it would be to still try anything. Talk. Now! Who organized it? I don't know. Someone higher up. Must have been one of Zenith's boys. Captain Zenith wouldn't have innocent people killed. Of course not. But you think the captain can control everything? His people have plans of their own. It was one of them. I'm telling you, this is almost straight from the top. Someone up there wanted the cop dead. They weren't supposed to kill the wife, too. Stupid bastards almost killed the little girl. He stopped talking. That's when he got it. You, he groaned out. You're Officer Knight's kid, aren't you? Oh, you are dead, bitch. I'm going to track you down and skin you alive. Good luck with that. A final gunshot cut through the air. One last spray of blood flew across the room. All Douglas Heft's eyes showed now were pale reflections of what they once were. His corpse slumped forward and all the ferocity just drifted away. Blackbird released the chain and let his one-eared head fall to the ground. Impossible, she whispered. It hadn't been Zenith, she was certain of it. But if someone in his cabinet was crooked, this was bigger than she expected. The whimpering drew her back to the real world. Hector was reaching desperately for his gun, but every twitch of his body sent pain stabbing through him, starting with his crotch and spreading out like a web across his body. Hector, she said softly. He heard her. His actions and noises grew more desperate now that he was her main focus again. The chain lashed out, and she slapped the gun away from his hands. "Reaching for something to hurt me with?" she asked as she strode over to him. "Haven't we learned our lesson yet? I'm the one who makes it hurt around here." She grabbed him by his jacket collar and lifted him off the ground. He was letting her now. Easier than fighting. "I guess we need some more educating, don't we?" She grabbed his bleeding cock and balls and squeezed down, jamming her other hand over his mouth to keep him quiet. "Shut up," she ordered. He actually tried to listen. Blackbird reached behind her glove and pulled out a chloroform sheet. She kept them hidden there for safekeeping. The dose on it was enough to make Hector weak in the knees, but it wouldn't knock him out. Good, she thought. She wanted him to feel this. She grabbed his belt and yanked his pants down, dropping him to all fours on the bench so his legs were hanging off the end. Hector tried to lift his head, but the chloroform was doing its job. He couldn't even make a fist with all the strength in his body. "I hope you're feeling comfortable, Hector," she said as she secured the hand straps on the bench. She made sure it was extra tight around his wrists. "No doubt one of Hef's girls have called the cops already. Plenty of gunfire in here to warrant that. Don't worry, they'll find you. But not before I make my lasting impression." She stepped around him and gently brushed her fingers over his bare ass cheek. The machine behind him was designed to pump away forever, the dildo secured to a turning wheel that would force it to slide back and forth until someone flicked it off. "I want this to be a lesson for anyone who hears the name of Mistress Blackbird." It was heavy, but with her last ounce of strength she managed to push the machine forward inch by inch until Hector groaned from his ass cherry being popped. She knelt down next to his ear so she could whisper it to him. "If you make me," she told him, licking his ear quickly as she did, "I will fuck you in the ass until you beg me to stop. Then I'll fuck you till you die." Hector started to cry again. Then she flicked the switch. She could hear his screams of pain even from outside the dungeon. Some of the doms had stayed behind and watched her walk down the hall towards the back door. None of them touched her. Not a single professional out of these women laid a hand on this barely 5.5-foot tall teenager. She had taken a key from inside the dungeon and undid the chain around her wrist, letting it and the broken piece fall as she walked. She got to the back door and put a hand on it. It was covered in blood, and she knew a partial handprint could be drawn from it. It didn't matter. The police couldn't find her. Hef's boys wouldn't have been able to find her. Natasha Knight had disappeared years ago. They could come looking if they wanted. "Hey!" Blackbird looked back to the dom that had spoken up. She had curly red hair and was dressed in a black corset that left her shoulders bare. "Thank you," she said. "Don't worry about the police. We'll spin them some bullshit." "Just get out of here," another told her. "Don't come back." Blackbird pushed on the door and stepped out into the cold night air. She just stood there for a few seconds, letting the chilled air wash over her. Blackbird limped away from the door and turned into the closest alley she could find. It didn't take long for her to feel the cold settling in. Her purple leotard and tights didn't do much to keep her warm, and she'd lost too much blood to really have a chance of heating herself up. Blackbird stumbled to her left and braced herself against the brick wall. Another portion of the blood trail for the cops to follow. She had never been hurt this bad before. Then again, she had never done anything so fucking stupid before. Holy fuck, that was crazy, she thought. She was alone again. The vulnerable 18-year-old brain was crawling back into control. Blackbird fought to hold on to it, but Natasha still existed behind the mask. She couldn't keep the act up any longer. A part of her wanted to fall over and throw up the last 5 meals she'd eaten. "I gotta say," the voice snapped her back into focus. Male. Not too deep, but not high-pitched. A comfortable singer's tone. Her left thigh was burning, but she forced it all out of her mind and stood on her own 2 feet again, forcing her adrenaline to keep burning. I don't care how tired I am. I'll make my body work if I have to. That was a hell of a show. Though next time, you might want to consider just finishing him off. Losing his dick, licking your boot, and getting rammed up the ass by a mechanical fucking machine? Homeboy is gonna need some heavy therapy to get over that one. Something blurred in front of her face. Something moving too quickly for her to see what it was. Then a second time. Then she was suddenly flying through the air, her lungs devoid of oxygen as her legs swept up from under her. In the blink of an eye, it was over, and Blackbird was standing next to the stolen four-door she had been driving for the past week. While her day job did pay well, she was still a little behind in her last rent payment, and all the costume purchases, bullets, and other vigilante miscellaneous tended to add up. Maintaining a car on all of that would push her past her limit. So, she stole when she had to. The girl didn't claim to be a hero, and her reasons were her own. She looked into the driver's side window and saw her own reflection. A quick check back and forth told her she was 5 blocks over from the little black box. A perfect amount of time to make an escape from the bloodbath crime scene. But it was how she had gotten there that was really pissing her off. "You've got to be kidding me," she grumbled. The streak showed up once more and came to an abrupt halt behind her. "Remind me never to use your services, Mistress Blackheart. I prefer to keep my ass cheeks together, unless I'm dropping a deuce." Strength, she reminded herself. A clown like this couldn't touch her, no matter how fast he was. She heard the words again. The thug's words that always rang in her head when she doubted herself. The ones she had heard 4 years ago, the night she became orphaned. Fight. Come on, fight. Fight like your life depends on it. "It's Blackbird," she corrected, looking over her shoulder and then slowly turning to face the fellow vigilante. "And don't worry, Flux. I can't think of a single woman that would want any part of your anatomy." The 20-something-year-old wore a sleeveless hoodie and loose-fitting black track shorts. Calling his shoes beat up would be like saying a rotten apple was fit for a queen. The damn things were practically held together with duct tape and chewing gum. The hood had been modified to hold to the top half of his face like a mask, leaving his chin and mouth exposed. Blackbird couldn't comment, really. Compared to him, she barely hid her identity at all. "I'd like to say you wound me, little girl." A sudden blast of air tossed Blackbird's hair over her shoulders. He was behind her now. Right behind her. "But I'm a little too quick for that." She turned once more and shoved him back. Gently, but with enough strength to show that she wasn't shaken. "How much exactly did you see?" "See? Nothing. But I heard the whole show." He pointed to his ears. "These heightened senses are a real kick. Though sometimes I do wish I didn't have them. My neighbor is a 90-year-old woman, and let me tell you, you can't unhear a granny like that going to town with her vibrator." "Are you always this smooth with the ladies?" Blackbird flipped him off and opened her car door, only to have it slam shut on her. If she didn't know any better, she would have sworn it shut on its own. She stared icy daggers at him. "What's the rush?" Flux asked. "We're just talking. Am I not friendly enough for you?" "If I wanted a friend like you, Flux, I'd squat down and drop a deuce of my own. But if you want to talk, let's talk." Blackbird crossed her arms and leaned against the window. "You heard the whole thing and decided not to help? Not very superhero-y of you, now was it? I knew you had it under control." "I was shot at." Flux just shrugged. "And was held there against my will for 2 days without any food or water." "Well, obviously I didn't know about that part. I thought you had just showed up like an hour ago or something." She glared at him, blankly. "No, I hadn't." She opened her car door again. Goodbye, Flux. It slammed shut a second time. This time, Blackbird threw a punch in his direction. Pointless, she knew. The freak could move faster than a bullet. She hit nothing but air. I'm done with this stupid game. If you won't let me drive away, then I'm walking. In your condition? Not bloody likely. No pun intended. He held up his hands in surrender. Look, I'm sorry. I know you've just been through a rough night. A rough night! And the last thing you need is me hanging around being a pain in the ass. So I'll just speak my piece and go. You've been causing quite an uproar lately. You think you're unknown, but you aren't, girl. And you ain't exactly bulletproof like some of us. She gave him a coy little smirk. That's what you're calling it these days? I thought the more appropriate term was psychotic split personality. Don't. He held up a finger to silence her. She caught the tiniest glimpse of the animal behind his mask, the true nature of the man standing before her. Or what, Fluxy? You going to let the other side out? She stepped towards him and made sure her hips shook a little as she did. He saw. She saw him looking. You think I'm becoming known? My body count tonight is nothing compared to yours. You should be behind bars if the cops could actually catch you. That's exactly my point. They can't catch me, but they can catch you. Besides, there are worse things in New Zenith than the police. All the humor dropped out of his face. He wasn't Flux anymore. Just another human being in a mask like herself. Just make sure the veteran doesn't ever cross your path. That motherfucker is crazy. They could both hear the sirens approaching now from a few streets over. A good sign that this conversation should get wrapped up quickly. She'd heard the stories. Never met the guy before, though. Sounds like a lunatic, Natasha thought. He doesn't scare me, Blackbird said, crossing her arms. He should, Flux told her. He scares the hell out of me. They say he's invincible, that he's some deformed ex-military guy who got discharged for killing his whole platoon. I even heard they sent him to some asylum, but he was too crazy for the doctors. Sure. And the Tooth Fairy just won the lottery and bought a Camaro that turns into a giant robot. Stories, Flux. Stories that I don't have time for. She opened her car door a third time. Flux didn't try anything. Just watch your back, kid. It wasn't a warning. He was actually worried about her. For a brief sliver of time, Natasha felt something that wasn't sadistic or a rough exterior. But no, that wasn't Blackbird. Blackbird didn't cry. I'm not a... Yes, you are. You think that mask and that dye job can hide the perky tits or the prepubescent body? You're not even 20 yet, are you? Blackbird rolled her eyes and stepped into her stolen car, slamming the door behind her. She at least gave him the courtesy of rolling the window down. I can look after myself, Flux. Thanks for the quick escape back there, I'll give you that, but I'm not looking for a sidekick right now. Watch your back, Birdie, that's all I'm saying. Heft was a pretty big mover and shaker in New Zenith. With him gone, something new is going to come along, and they may be gunning for you. And if he was right, and someone in the captain's cabinet is dirty, then maybe Zenith himself, he's not. You don't know him. I've learned enough to know who he really is. Captain Zenith was the first of us, and he's still the best. You'd be lucky to have his kind of reputation. Someone who works for him may be dirty, but he's not. He's the best thing this world has ever seen. Besides, I may have made a few enemies tonight, but at least I don't have to worry about my biggest one every time I look in the mirror. Flux leaned back, his face becoming a thin line of stoic aggression. She stared him down. Her head was pounding and her body in shambles. but she was still a dom, goddammit, and she could stay in control of any situation that decided to run in front of her. Good night, Flux. She flicked the switch and the window started to roll up again. Enjoy your jog around town. She looked away. He stayed there, just for a few seconds more, just to try and salvage a moment of his dignity. Then just like that, he was gone. A few tin cans and newspapers whooshed into the air as he went from 0 to 250 in the blink of an eye. Blackbird leaned back against the seat cushion and took in a few long, heavy breaths. She never thought he would leave. That little talk was the last thing she had needed. You think I didn't know all of that already, you fucking idiot? Of course Hef's death is going to shake things up. I'm no moron. The man has so much business all over this country. People are going to notice things. She flung her arm to the glove compartment and pulled out one of the 5 bottles of water stowed away. Best thing to keep on a utility belt. You think a grappling hook is the handiest thing out there? Try going days without water, then see which you'd prefer in a tight spot. She chugged the entire first bottle down and tossed it in the back seat before grabbing a second one. Better than sex. She put the second bottle in the cup holder and dropped the keys out of the driver's side visor. Blackbird gunned the engine and checked the clock. 11:40 p.m., Friday, the 18th of June. 2 fucking days, you oversized fuck, she cursed at the now deceased Mr. Heft. Courtney would be worried sick about her, and any clients she had scheduled for today would be a little pissed off. They may come crawling back, possibly quite literally, but she had no doubt lost a few. Still, with what happened here tonight, she may get a few of Hef's customers now. All the little bitch boys would need some new underground of chains and velvet to get their rocks off. The numbers on the digital clock began to waver and blur together. She needed to get home. She had lost too much blood and the lack of food wasn't helping. Her arms were already feeling like they had 25 pounds of lead flowing through each vein. She put her foot on the brake and then moved the car into drive. That's when all the strength in her neck gave out. Her head fell forward and hit the steering wheel. No, she muttered, barely. She had missed the horn, thank God. Last thing she needed was a stolen car blaring its horn while the woman in the driver's seat was bleeding to death in a mask and a purple leotard. Need to get home. She tried to push herself back up. Fight it, goddamn you, she thought to herself. That's when she heard his voice again. The voice she could never forget that haunted her dreams and was as much a part of her as Blackbird was. Fight. Come on, fight. Fight like your life depends on it. Her eyes drifted shut. Her whole body went limp. And the clock just kept going. 11:41. Friday the 18th. June. End of chapter 1. Okay, so there's a little insight into what goes on in my imagination. As I said, that was chapter 1. That was the first issue of Blackbird's Song. Blackbird is a new character, obviously, one of the protagonists that I have in this story. Don't know if you could really call her a good guy. She's kind of a cruel, sadistic bitch. But yeah, that's all I got so far for the first chapter. So if you like the way the story's going so far, stay tuned. There's going to be a new one. Like I said, I try to do these every week to a month. So every week to 4 weeks, I try and put up a new chapter. If you like it so far, then hit that like button. If you want to know when a new chapter is coming out, then hit the subscribe button. And other than that, just stay tuned for more of the Masks of New Zenith. See everyone next time.